The policy has been strengthened in key policy areas as requested and as you've heard from the Chair. We've made some important additions. These include the addition of 2 new overarching ambitions for London's economy to 2041. For London to play a leading role in the global transition to a low-carbon circular economy, and London continuing to contribute to the UK's economy so that London and the UK can grow together. We also have additional actions to address poverty and greater emphasis on the critical role the private sector must play in creating a more inclusive economy. There are also, Chair, additional references to engagement with partners such as trade unions and the need to monitor and mitigate the risks from advances in disruptive technologies. There's a greater emphasis on the call to businesses across London's growth sectors to set up their efforts to diversify their workforce. And finally, I've provided a high-level 45-page implementation plan setting out the priority actions I will take to deliver the strategy and the long-term indicators of its success.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Your economic development strategy mentions LEAP on a number of occasions. You will know that I was unimpressed by what I saw as LEAP spending inefficiently. The spending of what I thought was $200,000 on a beach party was outrageous. However, on further inspection, it looks like the party actually cost closer to $300,000 in total. Can you confirm the total amount of taxpayers' money that was used to fund this beach party?
Chair, the local community was the primary beneficiary of the free admission to the Dock Beach that's been referred to, that ran throughout this summer, a project entirely funded by retained business rate income from new businesses in the enterprise zone. This was agreed with the government and ring-fenced for a reinvestment within the Royal Docks. The event attracted almost 50,000 investors and visitors, giving local businesses a massive boost and enabled local people to connect with the Royal Docks. The Dock Beach is part of a wider regeneration of the Royal Docks, which has the potential to deliver up to 35,000 jobs and 4,000 new homes. And as I've said, Chair, the community project was self-funded through retained business rate income received directly from new businesses within the enterprise zone.
Okay, it's not just the beach party. LEAP also spent thousands of pounds to fund the Brixton Pound Cafe, a cafe where there's no set prices, customers pay what they like, and its website describes it as a utopian experiment to question neoliberal economic dogma. Is that a good use of money?
I think, Chair, that may be in a scheme funded by the previous mayor.
Are you saying it was or it wasn't?
I think that may have been a scheme funded by the previous mayor.
Well, you are saying it was?
Chair, I think it may have been a scheme funded by the previous mayor.
Okay, well, I won't ask you to repeat that parrot fashion. I'll look into that. LEAP has also spent money on photographs. I'm not sure that photographs assist economic development. Do you want to comment on that? Or Ragesh, do you want to comment on that?
Sorry, Chair, is the question photographs don't support economic development?
Basically, yes.
Well,
we're just looking for inefficient ways of money being spent. We've
Chair,
done lots of different things.
I'd suggest those businesses that spend monies with photographs and advertising will disagree with the Chair of the Economy Committee.
Okay, I'll come back to
That's
this
it.
more later.
Okay.
Yes.
Assemblymember Dismore.
How will Brexit affect the implementation of your
Economic Development Strategy.
Will have a big impact on London's economy. Where we are now is, I'm afraid, we're none the wiser what will be the outcome of what's happening with Brexit. There are a number of scenarios, Senator Dismore. One scenario is Parliament votes to accept the deal negotiated by the Prime Minister. The other scenario is that deal is rejected. If that's the case, there are 4 separate scenarios at least. 1 is no deal. 2 is general election. 3 is a public vote with the option of staying in the European Union. Or 4 is an amended deal. If it is the case that Parliament accepts the deal negotiated by the Prime Minister, essentially it's a blindfold agreement. And what we've done is kick the can down the road, potentially till December 2020, with the option of an extension, a one-off extension. So during the transitional period, we'll still have access and be members of the single market and customs union. But all we've done is delayed the discussion about future arrangements. In the meantime, massive uncertainty to our businesses. In the meantime, huge challenges in relation to getting talent to our country. and a real challenge in relation to investments. So all the scenarios are not great, save for the one where there is a public vote, where the British public decide to stay in the European Union.
Yesterday, the Chancellor admitted that leaving the EU under any Brexit scenario will make the UK poorer. GDP would be 7.6% lower than if the UK had stayed in, equivalent to around £150 billion. And Treasury analysis of Mrs May's deal states it will leave the size of the UK economy up to 3.9% smaller after 15 years, compared with staying in the EU, and a no-deal Brexit could deliver a 9.3% hit. Mr Hammond claimed it was not just about the economy, which I think is a rather bizarre statement for a Chancellor, you might think, and that the Prime Minister's deal would deliver political benefits. How many Londoners do you think voted to become poorer? And can you see any political benefits whatsoever for London from the government scheme?
Well, it just beggars belief that the Chancellor of the Exchequer is now talking about political benefits being the sole benefit of us leaving the European Union, when he's seen the figures, which shows the massive cost to our economy. And I'd remind colleagues in the Assembly that if there are fewer taxes being raised, then it limits our ability to provide better public services at a time where our city's population is growing. You'll remember us when we were dismal this time last year. I commissioned an independent organisation, Cambridge Econometrics, to go away and do a piece of work in the various scenarios of us leaving the European Union. One scenario, us staying members of the single market, customs union, long transition, to the worst scenario, in their opinion, us leaving the EU without any deal whatsoever. And even in their best scenario, our economy wouldn't grow as much as we would if we stayed in the European Union. A year later, the Bank of England and the Chancellor have done their own estimates and their own analysis, and it confirms what we've said. And I agree with you. I don't think many people who voted to leave the EU voted to make themselves poorer, to make it more difficult for their children and grandchildren, or to damage the NHS or our safety.
Your strategy in the leak commit around £295 million from the European Social Fund towards skills, employment, enterprise and youth programmes in London. If London doesn't get our fair share from the government's UK Shared Prosperity Fund after losing the European Regional Development Fund and the European Social Fund, what do you think the impact on London's labour market will be in the event of either a no-deal Brexit or the Prime Minister's flawed deal, bearing in mind we already have a problem filling vacancies in essential services like the NHS and care homes, and we see so many shops, cafes and restaurants with vacancy signs in their windows?
It would be severely damaging. I mean, you will know from your expertise that actually one of the schemes funded by monies from the European structural investment funds is helping those in long-term unemployment get into work. It's been a huge source of benefit to those families who've been long-term unemployed. The worry is, unless we get a fair share of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, we would not be able to do some of the things that we do currently. The idea that we take back control from Brussels, but it goes to Whitehall rather than coming back to London or the regions is one that nobody voted for as well. And I think it's really important for us to realise that if it is the case that the government pursues an immigration policy that only gives advantage to Tier 2, those earning above £30,000, then every industry in London, from the NHS, social care, hotels, restaurants, construction, tech, will suffer as a consequence.
And doesn't all this reinforce the argument for a people's vote on Brexit? This time, hopefully with a properly informed debate without lies and foreign interference from either Russia or the USA.
Well, the huge advantage this time compared to last time is last time those who were campaigning to leave the European Union were able to promise the land of milk and honey if we left the European Union. Now we've seen the outcome of negotiations with the European Union. So, for example, those who promised in 2016 that we could leave the European Union and have access to the single market have been proven to be wrong. Those that argued in 2016 that negotiating a trade deal with the EU could be done in an afternoon have been proved to be wrong. And so now the British public can have a choice in relation to the deal negotiated by our Prime Minister, in her words, the best she could do or anybody could do, with the option of those circumstances staying in the European Union.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Curtin.
Thank you, Chair. I find myself in the strange position of agreeing with you, Mr Mayor, because the deal that Mrs May has agreed with the European Union is a really terrible deal. It brings the worst of all worlds. It brings the disadvantages of membership but doesn't allow us the opportunities of leaving in full. And of course, as you know, leaving with a World Trade Organisation rules in place would be the best thing for Britain, and it's what people voted for in the referendum. But, Mr Mayor, in your draft economic plan, you call for us to stay in the single market and the customs union, which goes against the 2017 manifesto of your own party. Why have you called to stay in the single market and the customs union against the will of the people and against your own party?
Well, it is possible to be outside the European Union but be members of the single market and the customs union. You'll know that as somebody who is a self-professed expert on the European Union. And I'm pleased that you agree with me. You'll find many Londoners do as well. In relation to the fact this deal that the Prime Minister is negotiating is a bad deal, you're right, by the way, will be rule takers, not rule makers. And that's one of the reasons why, if there is a public vote, I'll be campaigning for us to stay in the European Union. And it's really important for us to realise we may disagree in relation to which side of the argument we're on in relation to whether we stay in the EU or not, but we can agree that this deal that our Prime Minister has negotiated is a bad deal.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. We do agree that this is a bad deal, and it seems to have united Brexiteers and Remainers on both sides of the argument. It doesn't give it's worse, the worst of all worlds. But I'll ask you about something else in your draft economic plan, and that is that you're calling for international students to be removed from the annual net migration target. International students who come here, they need housing, they need healthcare, they need to travel on public transport. Isn't it the right thing to do to keep them in the net migration figures so that we know how many are coming into the country?
Well, anybody who's studied the contribution made by international students will see the massive contribution they make. They're not a burden on the state at all. They're not a burden on public resources, and they contribute to our economy. The student fees they pay as international students is far higher than home students. Many universities benefit from that. The rent they pay to their landlords, the landlords benefit from the rent they pay. It doesn't come from housing benefit, it comes from their own income. Those who are postgraduate who then get a job pay taxes and national insurance, which benefit towards our economy. But the other massive advantage it has is the soft power advantage. I'm proud, whether it's presidents of the USA like Bill Clinton, whether it's prime ministers of Pakistan like Benazir Bhutto, or whether it's other leaders around the world, their experience with our country by being a student here has made them fall in love with our country, which means they're still friends even though they may have left as students of this country. But not just world leaders, whether you're a chief executive or a teacher or an entrepreneur, when you return to country of origin, your experience in our city makes you be somebody who is fond of London and wants to invest in our city.
Well, Mr Mayor, I'm not disputing that they pay high fees to many of the universities they come to, and it's beneficial that people come from abroad, and particularly in the expanding markets in East Asia, China, Vietnam, South Korea and so on. But they do need to be included in net migration figures, don't they? Because they are here as a person physically, so it would be wrong to remove them from net migration figures. And can you explain why you put that as a point in your draft economic plan?
I want to answer the question and bring in shortly an immigrant to our city to answer you the benefits he's brought to our city in a moment. But let me explain to you the difference between you and I. You start from the basis of assuming immigration is bad.
Mr Mayor, that is not that you're... Mr Mayor,
economically, culturally and socially
simply not true, Mr
by
Mayor.
Immigration, which is why I'll ask my Deputy Mayor, an immigrant, to answer your questions in relation to why I
Mr
think
Mayor,
it is
you haven't
important
answered the question that I was putting to you. You're trying to conjecture what's in my mind, and you simply can't do that. I was asking you about why you have put this point in your draft economic plan. So the answer to that won't be a conjecture about what I'm thinking. I want to know what you're thinking, Mr Mayor.
Let's deal with this directly. Does the Assembly member think immigration is good for our city?
I'm putting questions to you, Mr Mayor, and you're definitely trying to avoid answering my question. I'm not sure that I'm going to get an answer out of you. So let me move on to something else because I'm running out.
You can't answer whether you think immigration is good for our
city.
Well,
this is Mayor's question time. I'm putting questions to you, Mr Mayor.
Well, I think
it seems that you're not willing to answer the question about why you want those figures taken out of net immigration figures. You don't seem to be able to give me a straight answer to the question.
Let me deal with that.
Let me ask you something else, Mr Mayor, which is of importance as you don't seem to be able to give me a straight answer to immigration
Let me answer
figures.
that.
Well,
As I'm running out of time, let me, if I may, Mr. Chair, move on.
Give it a bit more time.
no, I won't give him a bit more time.
Um,
But it does
the-
need
the-
to be made clear, Mr. Mayor, that it's not you asking him questions. You, in your answers, you can interpret the question, but you mustn't directly ask him a question. Right, carry on.
I do actually appreciate you putting something else in your draft economic plan, which is allocating some money for 5,000 pupils in London to do CREST awards to improve people's understanding and performance in science, particularly among disadvantaged communities. That's something that I did when I was a chemistry teacher before I was in politics. I led some science students to do CREST awards, and it's very, very valuable. Now you talk specifically about allocating money for BAME communities and women. But we know, I'm sure you know as well as I do, that white working class boys in particular are falling behind academically. Will some of this money for these 5,000 pupils be allocated to white working class boys to help them as well?
Chair, the Senator raises a really important point. All the evidence is that white working class boys and girls do least well in our schools, and there is a number of strategies we're engaging in to address that, and it can't be right that those who need the most help aren't getting it, and so I can reassure you that some of our policies are targeted towards these working class boys and girls, white working class boys and girls that you referred to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to focus on the financial health of Londoners. I've raised this with you, Mr. Mayor, many times, and I'm really pleased that you've taken on so many of the recommendations from the Economy Committee's report, Shortchange the Financial Health of Londoners, in this final strategy. So first, looking at young people, you mentioned on page 81 that you will work with partners to address some of the key causes of financial exclusion and increase financial literacy among young people. And it was good that you invited so many of the fintech and not-for-profit organisations that are doing great work in this area to your recent Financial Health Summit that was hosted by Assemblymember McCartney just recently. But I was surprised to see no details of ongoing work on financial health for young people in the final strategy. So could you outline the practical steps you're planning to take to support the work of these partner organisations to improve the financial health of young Londoners? Or, if you prefer, you could write to me about that.
Chair, can I thank this member for giving me a chance to thank my Deputy Mayor, who hosted a financial education summit on the 12th of November. Certain things are outside my control: the regulation of financial services providers, the quality of the financial education, and the way debt money and advice is given by services and how they're commissioned. But some of the things we're doing in the strategy to address the specific point is encouraging the promotion of credit unions. They're key partners in this area as we go forward. We've also got to reduce the stigma in relation to receiving debt and seeking advice. But also young people need to understand how to manage an account, how to avoid getting into debt, and working with the tech sector and some of these innovations, we can work with them to make sure young people are better advised how to avoid getting into debt when they are older. So these are some of the things that Joanne McCartney discussed at the summit, and we'll carry on working with key partners going forward on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to move on, continually looking at financial health, but to talk about a new problem with the rollout of universal credit for low-earning, self-employed Londoners that was pointed out to the Economy Committee last week by Faisal Rahman from Fair Finance. So it's a new issue. He told us that the government is only providing a one-year exemption from the minimum income floor, after which self-employed Londoners will be assumed to be earning at least £274 a week from their self-employment for the purposes of universal credit calculation. But he said that small businesses take 2 or 3 years to build a sufficient track record to get beyond the extreme income volatility of a startup. So he advised us that low-earning, self-employed Londoners risk receiving less universal credit than their employed counterparts when the minimum income floor kicks in after a year. So this potentially leaves thousands of Londoners exposed to increasing debt and poor financial health. Now, in my response to your strategy, I asked if you would lobby government to provide an extended financial advice service for self-employed people and micro-enterprises. So can I today reiterate that request and now ask you specifically, will you lobby government to address the unfairness of the minimum income floor in the universal credit calculations to avoid the risk of a financial health crisis amongst low-earning self-employed Londoners in a year's time when that minimum income threshold kicks in?
Chair, I'm very happy to look at specific additional concerns with universal credit, and the Assembly member has given an example of another one. I've already lobbied the government extensively in relation to, in my view, their flawed plans to extend universal credit at a time when the pilots have shown real problems with this. But I'm very happy for my team to liaise with the Economy Committee to take on board not just this, but other concerns you may have as a committee in relation to the consequences to entrepreneurs and those starting a small business with the consequences of the universal credit.
Thank you very much. And finally, I want to move on to talk about climate change in the economy. At last month's Mayor's Question Time, we discussed the new IPCC report, which showed that at our current rate, we could exceed 1.5 degrees warming as early as 2030. Now, your economic development strategy acknowledges climate change risks, but apart from referring to the Nicholas Stern review from 2006, which is quite a long time ago, there is no recent assessment of the risks to London's economy associated with climate breakdown, and particularly in relation to the findings of the IPCC report, which are that we need to kind of take a more urgent approach to tackling climate change. So will you commission an assessment of the economic risks of climate change and include it as one of the EDS data sets in your implementation plan?
Well, Chair, you'll know one of the things that we said about the implementation plan and the indicators is they'll continue to evolve as there are new factors that are brought to our attention or that we need to be cognizant of. And the London Data Store is looking at a whole host of figures. I would say that the economic development strategy can't be seen in isolation. One of the recommendations made by the Economy Committee was to link these with other strategies we have. So, for example, there is a link with the economic development strategy and the environmental strategy that's been adopted, and also clearly a link between this and the draft London plan, all of which are linked with the economic development strategy. But of course, as there are new data coming on stream, the London Data Store will make sure they're published so the public can see what they are and the consequences as well.
So is that a yes, you will be looking at the economic risks of climate change for London?
I think your question was, will the data be published in relation to these concerns? And the answer I think I gave was...
Yes, I said, will you commission an assessment of the economic risks of climate change and include it as a data set?
Specific in relation to economic risk, Lucy, you want to do that point?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of it's something that we will look at on an ongoing basis, whether or not we look at an actual risk assessment specifically is something we can take away and look at that. We will look at the data store and look at what additional measures we can put on there.
Thank you.
Evolve over time, but we will look at that and see in what ways we could do that too, and come back to you.
I'd be very grateful if you could come back to me. Thank you very much.
That's
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Devonish.
Mr Mayor, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Economic development never rises uniformly across London, I'm sure you will agree. I wanted to particularly talk to you about North Kensington, North Westminster and White City within my constituency. All have successes, but all need, I hope you agree, further support. What specifically will the draft economic development strategy do to support job creation in these locations between now and 2024, please?
Well, can I say, Chair, that colleagues who don't know the Assembly member's area as well as he does will assume it's just full of affluent parts, but you will know, cheek by jowl, are affluent residents alongside London's most deprived community. That's why your question is so pertinent in relation to our ambition for the EDS going forward. A number of things, Chair, that are relevant. You'll be aware, Assembly Member Devonish, that we've done a huge amount of work in relation to those affected by Grenfell Tower fire, which is in your community. The Business Continuity Fund is providing funding to address the immediate impact to local businesses, and that will carry on going forward. We'll carry on helping them going forward. More broadly, the EDS ambition is for a fair and inclusive economy, which deals with my point about the cheap by jowl affluent residents with the most deprived residents. I'm hoping that your residents and businesses will benefit from the London Growth Hub, which is a one-stop portal that brings together the capital's fast business support offer into a single online resource. And also, I'm hoping that your businesses will benefit from the face-to-face work we're going to do from January for businesses to get ready for Brexit, whichever scenario may well come up. In specific reference to businesses in your community, we're working with the Westway Trust and the council, the Royal Borough of K&C, to develop an urban strategy and a delivery plan for the 23 acres of land managed by the Westway Trust. And that's been supported through the first round of Good Growth Fund. That's roughly speaking £50,000 worth of investment in just 2019. I'm also delighted that 2 other local projects were shortlisted in the second round of the Good Growth Fund, and you'll be getting news about that shortly. And also, Chair, I've announced £100,000 of development funding to the Kensington Community College in 2019, and all this will help the areas, the locations you talked about, and support the businesses in your patch.
Thank you. Lucy, do you want to add anything?
No, I'd agree with what you said.
Right, okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you. Despite some improvements from the draft version, I'm still not convinced that this strategy really delivers for Outer London. What specific action will you take forward to support the economic development of Outer London boroughs and ensure they're not left behind?
Well, there's a number of policies in the strategy, from high streets, which are relevant to all parts of London, to childcare, relevant to all parts of London, the nighttime economy, relevant to all parts of London, an inclusive economy, relevant to all parts of London, getting more and more living wage employers, relevant to all parts of London, the good work standard. The more employers we get supporting the good work standard, the better it is for all parts of London. Assembly Member Russell asked about consequences of climate change. It affects all of London, in and around the outer. One of the pieces of work the Night Tsar has been doing is bringing together nighttime champions from across London. It can't just be a Zone 1 activity. You'll be aware of the massive contribution made to our economy by the nighttime economy. 1 out of 3 jobs are in the nighttime economy, many of them in outer London as well. So I don't accept your caricature of the EDS being one that just benefits in London at the expense of outer London. There is lots and lots of policy here that benefit outer London too. And I'll just go back to a point I made previously, Chair. The EDS can't be seen in isolation. It's integral to look at the EDS in the context of the other strategies we have, from the draft and then plan to the transport strategy, the environment strategy, the housing strategy, the health and equality strategy, and the culture strategy as well.
Thank you. The now disbanded Outer London Commission once supported collaboration between Outer London boroughs and provided valuable research and supported projects. Would you consider establishing a similar commission, but perhaps expand the membership to include all the council leaders from Outer London boroughs to really just focus on things that are specific to those boroughs?
Well, we already do a huge amount of work with Outer London Council leaders, Chair. We've got a fantastic relationship with London councils. What we're keen to avoid doing is stepping on councils' toes. I know you as a former councillor wouldn't appreciate that, Chair. So what we do is we work very closely with the council leaders, but also the various chairs of various committees in councils across London. For example, there is a group of councils in East London who work very closely together. We work with them. There's a group of councils in the south of London who work very closely together. By the cross-party, it's not of any particular party. So I'd be keen to avoid reinventing the wheel. But if it is the case that there's value that can be added, and London councils agree with that, then of course we're happy to look at whatever structures that assist City Hall to assist councils who do, by and large, a great job trying to help the local businesses.
Okay, thank you. And your implementation plan says you will work with boroughs to reshape the bus network in Outer London. But obviously TfL's recent consultation didn't really indicate that bus service capacity would be shifted or even increased in Outer London. And it didn't make any mention of orbital or express bus routes. And it can be very difficult, I don't know, getting from Sutton to Kingston, for example, to neighbouring boroughs. How will you ensure that Outer London has the bus services it needs to support that local economic development?
Well, the ambition is, and the target is, and that is the end this year as well, is to increase the amount of kilometrage in Outer London for buses than has previously been the case. You're right, we are currently consulting in relation to the buses in central London. 33 of the 600 buses are being consulted upon whether to shorten the routes and change the routes for very good reasons. There are some routes where there are buses that go empty. There are some routes that have the need of the buses has been overtaken by other forms of public transport or walking or cycling. As far as Outer London is concerned, the boroughs are very different. You're right. that we should consider in town centre links rather than a one strategy for the all of Outer London. Senator Navin Shah asked a question on this at the last Mayor's Question Time, which I answered, and he still wasn't happy with the answer, which is his prerogative as a member of the Assembly in Outer London. But I'll make sure, if you'd wish, Chair, through you, for when the Deputy Mayor meets with Navin Shah to also meet with you to reassure you that we don't want an impression to be given that Outer London is going to be neglected in relation to buses. The idea is to increase bus capacity in Outer London, particularly in those parts of London that you referred to, one, where there is no tube service, like Sutton, and so they need a good, decent bus service because there is no tube service.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Apologies for the sneeze.
No problem.
Thank you for mentioning women and BME women in terms of making sure they're not forgotten in terms of economic prosperity in London in your opening statement, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to focus again on affordable childcare, and it's something which definitely gives me sleepless nights every month when that monthly figure comes out, having a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. The reality is that the female unemployment rate in London is much lower than the rest of the UK, and this is because of childcare. How will your economic development strategy help Londoners struggling with affordable childcare in London?
Well, firstly, just to underscore that point, I mean, childcare in London is far more expensive than childcare around the country. There are too many economically inactive women in London who want to be economically active. The main reason when you interrogate the figures and you speak to women who are economically inactive is because of childcare expenses is a big factor. And so we're doing a number of things to address the issue of unaffordable childcare. One of the big concerns to me is those who are eligible for free childcare not taking that up. And that's why we set up the early years hubs across London. There are 3 hubs, one in Newham, one in Barnet, one in Wandsworth and Merton, making sure that people know about the eligibility they have to free childcare for 2-year-olds, really, really important. And the take-up's like 61% in London. The lowest take-up any part of the country. We've also set up in City Hall since I became Mayor a childcare deposit loan scheme, and we're trying to roll that out to other employers in London. The Good Work Standard will be one way of encouraging employers to offer the childcare deposit scheme, really, really important. We're also, as part of the Good Work Standard, going to encourage employers to provide flexible working. You all know the importance that can provide to parents. The draft London plan will require boroughs to identify and address local needs for childcare, really, really important going forward. So, what we need to do is make sure that those facilities that are available, parents know about who are eligible, but also make sure employers do their bit to make it easier for those returning to work, but also new recruits to work in their places of work.
Again, appreciate that you don't have a statutory duty on this. It does fall on the local councils. And the reality is when you look at a range of those different benefits and welfare requirements, they can be quite difficult to navigate, because I just think of my own experience in terms of registering on the tax-free childcare website where they sent the wrong information the first time round and, the wrong codes. All those things can have a big impact. What can you do to ensure that London's parents, especially, women where English may not be their first language, or women who are going back to work after a period of inactivity, are fully aware of their rights and their entitlements when it comes to childcare or welfare support?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question, because it gives me a chance to say that from early next year we'll be starting a campaign to raise awareness of the issue amongst the parents you're talking about. It's really important they're aware of these issues, so we've got a funded campaign, and it'll be making sure that the message is sent to mums, dads and carers about what's available to them with active signposting, because it's really important they receive that assistance. At the same time, we are also going to be using some funding to help parents who want to work get into work. It's really important we do that as well. So that should be in January, but I'm happy to speak to you offline to make sure you know the exact dates so you can get involved in the campaign.
Great. No, many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, how does the economic development strategy provide the right conditions for SMEs to grow their business?
Really good question. It gives me a chance to remind the Assembly that on Saturday is Small Business Saturday, the first Saturday of every December. And I was just meeting with the Director of Small Business Saturday earlier on today, and she reminded me of the challenges small businesses are facing. More than 99% of businesses in our city are small businesses, and we've got to assist them. And so the EDS has a number of things that assist small businesses. The Growth Hub that we've worked on, the London Growth Hub, is a one-stop shop, if you like, for a small business to go to provide them with assistance. There is assistance there in relation to grants you can receive, how you can scale up. If you're thinking about starting a business, start, scale and grow. There'll be face-to-face assistance provided from the new year. Did you know across the country, half of small businesses don't have a website? 70% of small businesses across the country aren't thinking about investing in digital next year. And so the EDS has a number of plans to help small businesses, not just those who want to start a small business, but those who want to scale and grow as well.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a specific issue actually of accessing affordable workspace. And then not just that, but once you actually do access workspace, it's actually the issue of grow into space, but also the issue of affordable workspace, which is suitable for different needs. So you talked about broadband. So tech will require high-speed broadband, manufacturer would need space. How does the strategy encompass accessibility of workspace, which is suitable for different needs, but also then the second stage to grow into?
Yeah,
good question. 2 questions roll into one.
Good question. So we already now are providing property advice service, which provides free legal and financial advice to businesses signing a lease for the first time. Often it's difficult for you to know what your legal rights are. We'll give you the advice, really important. Secondly, we are on the London Growth Hub have devised a workspace map, and that's to help co-working spaces. Sometimes it's actually cheaper to co-work, but also it means you can speak to somebody next door to you or in the co-work space, which gives you ideas to benefit. We've set up a workspaces providers board, and these are people who can advise us on how to address some of the challenges that you're referring to. And of course, the draft London plan also supports the provision where appropriate for the protection of a range of low-cost business spaces. And of course, you'll know in relation to broadband and Wi-Fi, etc., that I've created for the first time ever a chief digital officer. And one of the things that Theo's doing is making sure we increase connectivity in particular parts of London, which is really, really important.
And Mr. Mayor, you've already been asked about Brexit, but I don't think you touched upon this aspect. So access to financial support is one of the biggest barriers to the well-being of SMEs. And I'm pleased to see that you will establish the Greater London Investment Fund with the European Investment Bank. So how will leaving the EU, if you do leave it, impact on the support that you're able to provide to SMEs?
Yeah, good question. So the access to finance is really important for SMEs, particularly since the financial crash. The two things we're going to be doing to particularly address this issue is one is the London Co-Investment Fund, which is £85 million worth of public-private venture capital fund, and it's designed to invest in those SMEs who are science, digital and technology startups. Separately, we have the Greater London Investment Fund, a £28 million venture capital fund for SMEs that provide equity finance to early-stage London SMEs. And the other thing that Rajesh has been working on is a Meet the Buyer scheme, which is not financed directly, but do you want to explain what the Meet the Buyer scheme is?
Yeah, it basically helps small businesses to sell to large companies, because often small businesses don't have access to or have the expertise to pitch to large businesses. Using our convening ability from City Hall, we bring small businesses and large businesses together so they are able to pitch, but we also help them provide guidance and support on how to prepare for the pitch as well.
This certainly seems a very good idea. Well, I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Bailey.
Afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Afternoon.
Your economic strategy says it wishes to increase employment rates for groups who are currently underrepresented in London's workforce, with a focus on BAME, women and disabled people. What concrete steps will your strategy take to ensure that this occurs?
So we've got particular pots of money we're investing in this area. I was mentioning in a previous question the issue of the European structural fund money. Some of the money we've got from the European fund money we're directing specifically towards those long-term unemployment, BAME communities, women, those in special educational needs, which I know Member Arnold has raised previously, and also those long-term unemployed. And as part of the devolution agreement with the Department for Work and Pensions, the devolution is to do with those in long-term unemployment, many of whom some of whom can sometimes be Londoners who are from BAME communities as well.
the strategy is slightly light on KPIs and measurables. So how will you measure your success? How will you measure impact? You talk about the European Investment Fund money, £71 million. It's a welcome amount of money. But how will you know that it's going to the right people, and how will you measure the impact, and what are the milestones and the timelines?
So one of the things I looked at was the previous economic development strategy, which didn't have an implementation plan. And so what we've done this time is, unlike the previous strategy, have an implementation plan. It's 49 pages long. There are a number of indicators there. But there is a metrics in relation to, you mentioned the £71 million ESF programme. That will invest £30 million in a range of employment and skills programmes to support young people into education, employment and training. And it will include a focus on young people with special educational needs and disabilities, care leavers, young people excluded from school, and those involved in gangs. So there is a metrics to see the success we make in relation to there. And some of the other schemes we've got, from the STEM subjects funding to Young Londoners Funds to careers clusters, all of them have a metrics by which to measure success.
Because I think what I'm asking for is, where is the overarching plan to make sure these particularly hard to reach communities are reached out to, are contacted as well? And a lot of the plan talks about the spending of the money as if it's a goal. That the spending of the money is one thing. What's a goal is the impact. Where are the KPIs that measure those impacts? Where are the tactics that focus on hard to reach groups, new tactics or tactics that have been proven to work in the past? Because the challenge for the Assembly will be to scrutinise your milestones and your timelines.
So in terms of we've obviously got the EDS implementation plan that sets out the actions that we're going to take to implement this. But what we have, and we present to the Assembly every quarter, is the GLA's performance management. So every programme that we run and where we have funding or where we control the funding is looked at and monitored through our quarterly reports to you in the Assembly. And in those quarterly monitoring reports, you can see the milestones that we've set ourselves, the KPIs that we're setting ourselves, and how we're doing against those. And we're very happy to discuss those in more detail as we go through. So, for example, the ESF programmes that we're talking about now as part of the skills devolution, there's a number of programmes there that we'll monitor on a regular basis.
I see that, but some of in the economic strategy itself, those KPIs are not clear. I can't see the overarching ethos about how you're going to contact hard-to-reach communities. I can't see anything different. And again, I go back to the fact that much of the output seems to be the spending of the money, where we are much more interested in the impact of the spending of that money. So where in this strategy is that overarching idea, and where are these KPIs that they should be detailed in here, not in your quarterly reports and meetings that we have?
Well, what we're going to measure and what we're going to put on the London Data Store is a wide-ranging number of measures which will track the economics performance and the performance that we've carried out so far. And there's a much broader range of indicators that we've looked at before, which will assess the social and economic welfare, etc. And it'd be very clear on the London Data Store the way that's going, if that's going up or down. So we're going to look and consider this wider range of indicators. But obviously not all of those are under the Mayor's control. What is under the control is the money that we're spending and how we're funding it. And those are very much based around outcomes and outputs, which you can see in our quarterly monitoring reports, the outcomes and the outputs that we're looking for, which we'll monitor on a regular basis. And for every programme that we do, we also carry out monitoring and evaluation to see if those outputs and outcomes are the ones that we wanted to do and were reached.
Mr. Mayor, I just ask that you place great emphasis on this, because when we looked at this on Economics Committee, one of our guests said it's a great list, it's a laudable list, but it doesn't feel like a strategy. And what will make it a strategy is someone pressuring the delivery, someone understanding what are the KPIs we're looking for, what's the impact been, and I think that will take some leadership from the Mayor.
I'm not sure if I understand the point the members making, bearing in mind the answers I've just heard and the strategy I've read, but if he wants to write to me after this committee, I'm really happy to read the concerns he has and to reassure him that they've been addressed.
I'll do that, but the point I'm trying to make, Mayor, is just to make sure that you push that these communities are actually reached, because they're often spoken about, but the impact isn't often felt at the other end in the community.
Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you, Chair. I want to turn to the issue of the nighttime economy, Mr. Mayor. Could you tell us how your economic development strategy will create a thriving yet inclusive nighttime economy for London?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pleased you used the word inclusive. It's really important. Thriving, of course, but inclusive is a difference in this EDS from previous EDSs. The vision for London as a 24-hour city document is really useful when it comes to answering your question, because we need to make sure that the principles we have for sustainable development are safe, welcoming, thriving city, but also a diverse one. The three areas that are relevant to the question you've asked in relation to the 10 principles, 3 of the 10 principles deal with your point. One of them is to provide vibrant opportunities for all Londoners, regardless of age, disability, gender identity, race, religion, sexual orientation or means, to promote a welcoming and accessible nightlife, but also to be strategically located across London to promote opportunity and to minimise impact. And one of the things that Amy LeMay, the Night Czar, has done is to hold regular meetings with nighttime borough champions. It's a network to support boroughs and share good practice, planning, licensing, economic development, culture and community safety as well. And we've encouraged London boroughs to create their own nighttime visions, and part of that is making sure that they're inclusive and the nighttime economy doesn't work at the expense of certain parts of our community.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And turning to the workforce, I mean, obviously the nighttime economy it's a big part of London's economy. It's growing, but nearly twice as many workers in nighttime occupations earn below the London living wage as compared with people who work jobs in other occupations. How will you use your strategy to help workers receive their fair share of the growth in the nighttime economy?
And this is really important. I mean, so 1 out of 3 Londoners work in the nighttime economy between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m, but 500,000 earn below the London living wage. And that should worry us all. So what we're going to try and do is, when we publish the Good Work Standard, get as many employers of those working in the nighttime economy to sign up to the Good Work Standard. The Good Work Standard is a quality kite mark. The idea is, if you sign up to the Good Work Standard, you're paying a London living wage, but also other good terms for your employees, like flexible working and other issues as well. Really important. One of the reasons why I'm really proud we frozen TfL fares, introduced the night tube, continued with the night buses, but also have the night overground, and have the hopper fare, is it assists people get around our city in a more affordable way. You'll remember, before I became the mayor, in the 8 years before, the fares went up by 42%. Well, they've been frozen. That assists those working in the nighttime economy as well. So we're doing a number of things to assist those working in the nighttime economy. One of the things they can do is to join a trade union. All the evidence is those members who work in the nighttime economy who are members of a trade union get better terms and conditions than those that aren't. But also, if you're treated better in your place of work, what I'm trying to get across to businesses is your businesses flourish and thrive as well, because it leads to increased productivity, increased recruitment, increased retention, less days off sick and less absences as well. So it's a win-win.
Absolutely. Well, I absolutely endorse your what you say about people joining a trade union. We know that sectors with greater trade union membership, people are paid higher wages, and there's no secret why that is. Could you just say finally, in terms of working conditions and safe transport, you've talked about the hopper fare and cheaper transport, but there's also the issue of safe transport. What support are you going to be providing through your economic development strategy to workers to ensure we have good working conditions and safe transport?
It's really important. I mean, crime generally at night time is a big source of concern. For those who use the nighttime economies, those who go to the theatres or restaurants or clubs, but also those who work in those places as well. So in relation to transport, when the night tube began, we increased the amount of BTP officers, police officers funded on the underground network by, I think, 100. Actually, crime in the night time on the public transport system is actually less in proportion terms than in the daytime. But secondly, you will know from being a councillor in Lewisham that actually, the police are working around the clock with councils in relation to addressing all sorts of crime where they can. The big issue in relation to crime is the lack of police officers. There are currently fewer than 30,000 officers working incredibly hard. So the police will carry on making sure they work with councils, working with those in the nighttime economy, doing their bit. And the final part of the equation is it's worth recognising the fantastic contribution businesses make with business improvement districts. The bids do a great job in relation to CCTVs in relation to working with the police and the insecurity they have there as well as a good partnership approach, which is one way we're going to make people feel more confident going out at night time, including making it safe for those who go at night time as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member McCartney.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I would like to know how this strategy is going to help reduce poverty in London, especially given the uncertain economic climate and government's cuts to welfare.
I mean, it's a big concern. I mean, just to remind colleagues, the cuts to welfare are not simply the welfare benefit cuts, they're the caps that have been brought in, universal credit, huge sources of concern. Some of these are outside the gift of the Mayor of London. There's things we can do to help. Making sure people are aware of their rights is really important, but also making sure as many people as possible who do the right thing and are working get a decent day's pay for a decent day's work, and that's why the London living wage is so important. We can't force employers to pay the London living wage. What we can do is entice them by explaining the benefits of being the London living wage employer: better recruitment, better retention, less days off sick, better productivity for the workplace. In relation to the EDS, what we're trying to do is to target the assistance to those, as I mentioned before, have been long-term unemployed, those communities who we know have an issue in relation to underemployment, BAME communities, certain women, and to assist them getting to work with decent wages, which is the best way out of poverty is to receive a decent wage for doing a decent day's work.
Thank you. My local Citizens Advice Bureau tells me that they are inundated with people, particularly welfare issues, but also Londoners, our fellow Londoners, facing debt and financial insecurity. What can your strategy do, particularly about those extremely vulnerable Londoners?
Well, the best thing somebody in debt can receive is good financial advice. That's often lacking. And you and I will both know that one of the big sources of CAB funding was the government. That funding has been slashed. Another source was councils giving the funding, but councils have lost money from central government. That funding is being slashed. Another source of funding was legal aid. That's been slashed. So many CABs around London are closing down. So many parts of London are advice deserts, where people who are vulnerable and need proper assistance can't get it, and therefore borrow from either places which have a high interest rate or even worse, loan sharks. And so what we're trying to do is encourage the take-up of credit unions, encourage employers to work with their employees with good credit unions rather than the alternative. Really important that people receive good advice. And so some of the things we're doing is the stuff you talked about in your education, financial education summit, encouraging employers to promote payroll deducted loans and savings products to their staff and partnering with credit unions, working to reduce the stigma of problem debt and seeking advice, supporting efforts to promote access to affordable financial services, and encouraging innovators in the tech and financial services sectors to develop new tools that can assist people to manage their monies more effectively.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Shah.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, I have questions pertaining to sustainability of high streets. High streets are critical to local economies. How does your economic development strategy support and create sustainable and thriving high streets?
You know, you're right to talk about high streets, but we sometimes undervalue their importance. Their economic benefits is obviously obvious, but the social benefits and the environmental benefits of having a thriving high street are huge. The amount of particularly older people who get to speak to somebody, the only human being in a day, by going to the local shop to buy a pint of milk or whatever it may be. But it's also worth reminding ourselves that for a variety of reasons, post offices have closed down, pubs tend to be less used, and there are fewer places for people to mix and mingle, and the high street is one place that they can do so. And just a reminder, this Saturday is Small Business Saturday, and all of us will hopefully be supporting our local high street by shopping there. So a number of things in the EDS. The Good Growth Fund is tangible assistance, financial assistance for regeneration programs, including in high streets, really, really important. I'll give you a couple of examples of tangible difference. Plumstead High Street, we've invested hugely in improving the public realm, which helps the high street in that part of London. The second good example is in Ilford, where we've done work to help with the cultural quarter, but also a temporary market. And so there are things we're trying to do. We set up a London market board to advise us in relation to strategy and policies to assist markets. When I was growing up, people would go to the market to shop and buy things from pet shops to food, to clothes and sports gear. And there's been a real shortage of markets going forward in the last few years. We're trying to reverse that trend as well. So targeted intervention, working with councils is really important to assist high streets across our city. One of the questions raised was about buses. One of the reasons why I'm keen to have decent public transport, good public transport in outer London, is because it gets the customer to shops which are often in the high street.
Mr. Mayor, as you know, the high streets are under tremendous pressure, a lot more than before. And you got high streets with changing mode that they are with rapid automation, online retailers, and increased business costs, etc. How does your strategy future-proof at all high streets to ensure that they remain vibrant for a foreseeable future?
It's worth reminding ourselves that high streets have been in danger in the past. 20 years ago, there was a proliferation of out-of-town centre developments, the megastores, which led to people driving to these out-of-town centre developments, high streets struggling. There have been all sorts of challenges they faced in previous decades. I think the challenge they face now is the biggest they've ever faced, because you're right, you've now got the internet who they're competing with. People in the comfort of their bedroom or their living room or their kitchen can order stuff which deliver the next day to their home, which is why I think we've got to make sure the high street continues to be attractive for shoppers. One of the reasons why I'm encouraging more walking and cycling is because the evidence is it increases the footfall in our high streets, which leads to more business. So if you look at the mini Hollands, particularly in Waltham Forest, there is evidence that the mini Holland has led to the high streets there doing better, because people are now using the high streets either to walk on or because they're cycling and will stop and pop into shops. We've got to make sure the high street is attractive. This Saturday, we'll be planting trees during this week to have National Tree Planting Week in London. 80,000 trees being planted. I've been in Redbridge planting trees, and also outside here as well. That's an excuse to people to go and enjoy their high street. The fact that it's pleasant, it's a nice environment. I think we've got to make sure that we do what we can to assist in the high street. That includes us as consumers thinking about it as well. Don't we want to help our high street, our local shop, whether it's buying a newspaper, buying a pint of milk, or this Saturday on Small Business Saturday, popping down to our high street to support our businesses. These are family businesses. It's a circular economy. If we support the local shopkeeper, the money stays in the community. So it's worth all of us thinking about where we shop and how we can benefit the high street.
I absolutely agree with everything you said. The challenge is going to be how we can sustain this for not only economic, like you said, economic and cultural reasons. And that is why whatever initiative we can have to maintain that fabric of local high street, we must do, and that is something is critical. You mentioned the Good Growth Fund. Any idea what would be targeted to stimulate the economic growth, and do you have any figures as to what is investment?
I will do. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention, the pressure on high street is also business rates, and we're lobbying the government in relation to business rates relief and devolution of business rates. So as far as the Good Growth Fund is concerned, that's a massive regeneration fund which gives local communities the chance to play a key role. The successful projects that will receive funding from round 2 will be announced shortly. It's a further £5 million funding to the £20 million LEAP funding from the Business Rates Retention Pilot to specifically promote projects that support local economies. So that money is going to be going out of the door. And also, just to remind you, there's the crowdfunding initiative, which has been hugely successful, because that gets the local community involved in raising funds, which means they have a vested interest in making sure their high street does well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Twycross.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, you've mentioned the treatment of workers and trade unions and the London Living Wage. I wondered if you could elaborate a bit on how the Good Work Standard will work in practice and what trade union involvement there's been in developing that.
Yeah, good question. So we've had at the design phase of the Good Work Standard involvement from trade unions, businesses and others as well. And you'll see in the economic development strategy there's reference to trade unions in the role they've played. It is a fact that the most successful businesses are one where there's the best employee-employee relations. It makes common sense. If everyone's pushing the same direction, a business flourishes or thrives. Doesn't matter if it's a public sector business or whether it's a private sector business as well. And what we want with the Good Work Standard is to have not just simply public sector signing up to it, but private sector as well. I'm a firm believer in the recognition of trade unions. I'm a firm believer in meeting regularly with those that represent the workers in your place of work. So this week, I met, as I do regularly, with Unison, who are the recognised trade union for the workers in City Hall. And as a consequence of that, leads to not just better recruitment, better retention, progression. And I call it talent management. If you're a business and you've got talent, how you manage them leads to your business being successful or unsuccessful, leads to your public sector service being a good one or a bad one. And so we'll have a soft launch of the Good Work Standard this side of Christmas, I hope. The idea is to get some businesses signed up at an early stage, launching it properly in the new year, to have names of businesses and public sector organisations we can name, which will encourage others to join the Good Work Standard. You'll be aware of the huge progress made with the living wage. Well, this is more ambitious than the London Living Wage and the work they do there. Integral to this is paying a decent salary for a decent day's work, but it's other issues from flexible working to help with childcare and all sorts of other issues that we know lead to a good employer having employees who are happy and can afford to live in our city.
And how will the standards be monitored? Because it's one thing people getting the badge, but how do they actually how are you going to ensure that they actually walk the walk and that you're confident that the Good Work Standard won't become something people get and then put on a shelf and forget about, making sure it happens?
So there's two concerns. One is that simply you get the quality mark and then you neglect to provide the services you need to be a Good Work Standard employer. We're talking about how to have a soft touch approach in relation to that. So we've got the confidence of knowing somebody's a Good Work Standard employer without needing to have an officer type inspection on a regular basis. Really important. But secondly, is having a route to being a Good Work Standard employer is actually more important as far as I'm concerned, because what we don't want to do is the good employers who we know are good employers sign up, and then those who are okay but could be a good Work Standard employer in the future haven't got a route to get there and stuff. And that includes a Good Work Standard employer working with those that aren't, but also big employers working with small employers to give them assistance in relation to things they could be doing. It could be payroll, it could be around employee recognition. So the idea is to team up bigger employers and smaller employers, those who are Good Work Standard employers and those that aren't. And that's why people have been expressing frustration that it's taken year 3 to get this off the ground, but it's important we've got it right to make sure the public and private sector, big and small businesses are on side.
And are you confident that if somebody works for an organisation that's sort of signed up to and is recognised with a Good Work Standard, that all those individuals will recognise that they work for somebody that deserves it? How can you get that confidence?
Well, look, all rules have exceptions. Anyone can talk about a child that goes to a outstanding school who's not doing great, or anybody who may, so we've got to make sure that the ethos goes through the business or the public sector organisation. And that's one of the reasons why, in answer to some of Copley's question, I made the point about trade unions. Trade unions have a huge role to play, in relation to making sure the ethos goes through the organisation. So the ethos of making sure you treat everybody fairly, you try and get people fulfilling their potential. There is a route to getting to the top of the business. All these things are really important.
Okay, so would trade union recognition be a requirement of getting the Good Work Standard?
Yeah, I think I've not seen the latest iteration, but there is sort of a bronze, silver, gold in relation to Good Work Standard, so recognising a trade union is clearly one of the criteria to be a Good Work Standard employer. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, quite a lot of people will still be focused. Obviously, people's pay has been sort of under a lot of pressure over the last decade. This isn't going to take away focus from the living wage and making sure people have got the pay in the pocket.
So actually, I think this builds on the fantastic work done by the Living Wage Foundation and the Living Wage organisers. I'm tonight addressing London citizens to talk about some of the progress we've made over the last 2 years. Since I became mayor, there's been a 50% increase in living wage employers. There are now 1,500 accredited living wage employers in London. That's really important. By itself, it's not enough. We've heard about issues around childcare, around poverty, other issues that have been raised around safety. So there are other things that a good employer can do on top of paying a decent pay for a decent day's work.
Great, thank you very much.
Assembly Member Arnold.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr Mayor, if I may, can I address my question to the Deputy? Deputy, I understand that over the past 5 years, London's artificial intelligence and machine learning companies have attracted over £207 million in venture capital. Now, London also has a strong research expertise in AI, but we cannot get away from the fact that working practices and types of employment will change. So how does the economic development strategy account for the changing nature of work in the future? Because if you're not planning for the future now, out of this strategy, then we're going to be left with a void and the possibility of London then going backwards.
Yeah, absolutely right. The artificial intelligence is booming quite fast. And I'm glad that London is the artificial intelligence capital of Europe. We've got over 700 artificial intelligence firms, which is more than twice of Paris and Berlin combined. So there's a lot of research being carried out in artificial intelligence space. But whilst technology is a great challenge, it's also a great opportunity, all these technical challenge. I've just returned from China and I used a big old Chinese proverb which says that when the winds of change blow, some people build walls and some people build windmills. I think we should be the one building windmills, which means that we use technology towards our advantage and using that to enable small businesses as opposed to threat. And that's why some of the things we are doing through our Business Growth Hub is helping businesses to become more technology enabled. Even if you are a small hairdresser, for example, how to use social media to attract more customers, how to apply for the loans, because now using fintech, there are a lot of avenues where small businesses can apply for loans, but sometimes they are unaware or they don't know how to use technology to access finance or attract more customers or to even start exporting. These days it's so easy to start exporting even if you are a small business. So using technology as to our advantage and as an opportunity rather than a threat. So with EDS there is a special focus on innovation, special focus through some of the initiatives that we are doing, like the Civic Innovation Challenge, where we foster innovation and we give prize and support to new ideas which are tackling not just the economic problems but the other social problems which can be used, where technology can be used to solve them. For example, fuel poverty or economic inequality, how technology can be used to solve some of these challenges. So again, the Mayor Civic Innovation Program and there are some other programs that we are using to address those.
Thank you. I mean, and I am with you with all that you've said. The only problem that I have is I don't see the link with the FE sector. And you talked about the desperate need now for us to skill up our workforce. I mean, the FE sector train more workers than any other sector. And the obvious link in this strategy to the FE sector is no representative on the London Sector Skills Board. With all that you're doing worldwide, how do you then bring together that partnership between yourselves, other actors, and the FE sector? Because they are placed to skill up the working population across London.
Absolutely. There's no point in developing a skills strategy if it is not in conjunction with the employers. And for that reason, the Skills for Londoners strategy, in order to give more input in that, we are working more closely with employers and setting up Skills for Londoners Business Partnership, which is a board that I'll be chairing, a board of employers, so that we have right input from the employers. So we are identifying the skills gap properly, creating a knowledge base, and imparting the right kind of skills for young people, for not just for the jobs of today, but for the jobs of tomorrow. But the skills is absolutely the most vital thing, I think.
Well, can I just say, given that the Mayor will inherit the skills budget next year, I do think that we should see more of a direct engagement between the strategy, yourselves, and the FE sector. But I'll make that a comment.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you very much. much, Chair. Your economic development strategy contains the target that by 2041 London will be cleaner, greener and ready for the future, and it will play a leading role in the global transition to a low-carbon circular economy. But I wondered if you could set out in a little more detail exactly how we're going to be working with businesses to move towards that more sustainable circular economy rather than the linear throwaway one that we've tended to fall within.
Thank you for the question and for your continued interest in this really important area. So the London Growth Hub provides a huge amount of support and raises awareness about the business benefits. This is the important one. There's a business benefit. It's Rajesh's windmills versus the Wolves point, a business benefit to a more environmentally friendly business model. Some of the work we're doing is, you'll be aware of the Greater London Investment Fund that I talked about, but also the work of the London Waste and Recycling Board Advanced London Programme. We'll be providing funding and business support to clean tech and the circular economy businesses. So financial assistance to help small businesses in particular build up this piece of work is really, really important. Through our Entrepreneurs Programme, we're supporting some assistance for those new circular economy startup businesses. There'll be prizes of £20,000 for the best business ideas, similar to the Civic Innovation Challenge Fund initiative that Rajesh talked about. But also, it's worth reminding ourselves, because we forget, we have control of, roughly speaking, £11 billion worth of procurement. And so using our procurement levers, we should be encouraging those in the supply chain to think about the circular economy. It's really important. So it's a combination of those issues. And the option is very easy. We can either ignore the importance of climate change, concerns around the environment, which I think would be the wrong thing to do, or we can realise that finding solutions is an opportunity for us going forward in relation to high-skilled, well-paid economy.
I mean, I think that's really important, but I think one of the areas that a lot of us are contacted about quite frequently, which is an area that LWAB has been doing some work on as one of the 6 waste streams, is the whole area of textiles and items that people quite often just fly tip. And I can't be the only Assembly member who's constantly contacted about fly tipping, and I know many councillors are. And I just wondered, when you were talking about prizes for innovative startups, is there something more that we can do in this area to encourage people not to just dump things on street corners? Because many of those items are things that could be repurposed or reused. And I'd really like us perhaps to even do something specific to encourage people in that area.
Well, this is an area that's normally, as you know, council control these, but I'm happy to look into this, but these are council matters. But
yeah, I mean, there are some things that we're doing. I mean, obviously through the Entrepreneurs Fund, we look at, we talk to students and say, come up with ideas to improve the environment and come up with clean tech, things like that. So ideas may come through that. One specific thing that we're doing is that we're working with the London Fire Brigade to try to workwear repair and reuse project in partnership with DHL. So that's one example of how we're taking textiles and doing that circular economy. So we can do things and we can lead by example through the GLA group to show how some of those things can work.
I think that's good, and I think we've been doing some really interesting work about plastics and obviously making it more valuable so that it can be remade and repurposed. But if I can just come back to the work with businesses and making it more attractive to them, trying to persuade them to recycle more. Is there some more information that we can give to them about how they can actually reduce costs? Because the more time I spend talking to businesses about the circular economy, about recycling more, the more obvious it is that they reduce cost.
We can do more with that. So we've got the London Business Climate Change Leaders Initiative, and that's where we work with some of London's biggest employers to look at actions we can take to meet the goals in London Environment Strategy and in the EDS as well. And there's a lot of businesses there that are starting to put initiatives into place. So Sky, for example, has committed to reduce all its single-use plastics. So by working through some of those really big companies, we can show how through their supply chain and other ways it saves money, it's good for business, and we'll continue to do that.
That sounds good, and I hope that learning can continue to be shared amongst all businesses across London. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Boff.
Yes. Mr. Mayor, you've declared yourself the most pro-business mayor there's been, is that correct? Is that correct?
So was that there's a question?
I understand you've declared yourself the most pro-business mayor ever.
Yeah.
Thank you. You've also very notably in your report, in your economic development plan, indicated very clearly the contribution that immigrants have made to London's economy, and that they're entrepreneurial and, generally speaking, very willing to work and contribute. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You also featured a number of industries in your economic development plan, and named a few, like the fashion industry, for example, and various high-tech industries. But there's one industry that you have a direct control over, which you can significantly affect the productivity of, and that's the private hire vehicle industry. Do you think that you've reduced sufficient barriers to enter into being a private hire vehicle operator?
I mean, the best way to answer that question is to respond to my strategy. I deliberately use the phrase good growth, because growth per se is not necessarily to benefit our city, it's going to be good growth. And the same applies in the context of the question around private hire vehicles. One of the things I've been lobbying the government for is the power to cap the amount of private hire vehicles in London for a variety of reasons. Because good growth isn't having hundreds of thousands of private hire vehicles driving across our city, bearing in mind the concerns we have around congestion, around air quality, and other issues as well. And that's before you get to the issue of the gig economy and the conditions in which some of those who work in private hire vehicles work in. You'll also be aware from reading the EDS the emphasis I give to the inclusive nature of the economy. So, for example, lots of the questions asked by Labour members has been around workers, poverty, women, other issues who don't benefit from the globalisation of our economy. So, in the context of private hire vehicles, I've got some power over regulation, although the government legislates in relation to what my powers are in relation to regulation. But of course, there are things TfL can do as the regulating authority with the powers given to them by Parliament.
So are drivers of PHV vehicles bad people?
No, not at all. No worse than Assembly members.
So, but they're contributing to bad growth?
Well, if you're somebody who is responsible for a situation where we have in London poor quality air, I'm not holding you personally responsible, but we can't escape the fact that half the NOx and particulate matters comes from transport. So I don't think a bus driver is bad, but the fact that I want to clean up his or her bus so it's low emission is important. And that's the context of what I mean by having 120,000 PHVs is not good for our city. If it carries on going at this level, I'd remind the Assembly, the numbers of PHVs in 2008 was roughly speaking 60,000. It's gone up to 120,000. I'm not saying minicab drivers per se are bad. What I'm saying is the particulate matter and NOx they emit is bad. What I'm saying is the congestion they cause can be bad as well. And congestion, as the Assembly will know, causes our economy millions of pounds.
That figure you quoted, 120,000, that's the number of vehicles but not the number of licences, is that correct?
I think it's the number of licences actually. Maybe about, I'm happy to check.
Number of licences, not the number of vehicles.
Yeah, it's the other, yeah.
So actually fewer vehicles than 120,000.
Fraction less, yeah.
Yeah. So are you trying to drive private hire out of business? Is this the reasoning behind your massive increase in fees for private hire vehicle operators? Is that the intention?
No, I've not got the powers to cap private hire vehicles. What we've sought to do is
Not the cap. I'm talking specifically here, Mr. Mayor. I will go on to the cap, about the charges that you've implemented for private hire vehicle operator fees.
No, that's to make it fairer. So you had a situation before where a private hire operator who may have had 9 cabs was paying the same fee as somebody who may have had far more. And so the idea is to have bans that are more equitable in relation to the amounts paid by the operators who run private hire vehicles.
That's interesting you've said that. You're saying you're trying to make it a bit more equal for the smaller operators than equitable. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I went to secondary modern. I often use the wrong word. And yet, if you are a small PHV operator just starting up in the business, perhaps you've just arrived in London, perhaps you are a recent immigrant who wants to contribute to our society, and you want to start up a small PHV firm, it's going to cost you £1,000 per vehicle. But if you are an Addison Lee or an Uber, it's going to cost you £70 per vehicle. How do you find that more equitable, Mayor, for small businesses who are trying to start up?
Well, I've not got the figures in front of me, Chair, but I'm happy to look at the figures.
I have the figures available.
Yeah, well, no,
if you like.
the point being is I've not got the figures in front of me, so I can't say I can't necessarily accept the figures that you've given. What I can say is that we're clear in the economic development strategy. We want to support businesses, but it's in the context of good growth and the context of balancing the other competing needs a global city has. And one of those competing needs is addressing the issue of making sure that the operator fees are equitable, making sure we recognise the challenges there is in a city of our population.
Mr. Mayor, I understand the aim. You talked about them being equitable, but
and
they
congestion
clearly
as well.
aren't, are they? They clearly aren't equitable if it is much cheaper per vehicle for a big operator than it is for a smaller operator.
But Chair, we could use
how would you encourage, Mr. Mayor, somebody who wants to enter into that particular industry? What would your advice be to them?
Well, actually, anybody who knows anything about basic economics and demand and supply would probably advise against somebody entering a business where there's 120,000 PHVs in an environment where we know that the current transport strategy encouraging more public transport, walking and cycling. And the same criticism could be said about somebody who buys a pint of milk from the local high street, which is what we're going to support, versus going to a major supermarket. Clearly, economies of scale, whether you're a private hire vehicle operator or whether you're a supermarket and a high street shop, are different. So I'm not sure if a basic economics lecture is the right thing to discuss in the context of PHVs, but the point being that I don't resolve from having a policy in relation to operators and licences that is more fair than it previously was.
But of course it demonstrably isn't fair, Mr. Mayor, and it isn't fair on the smaller operators. Are you aware that since you introduced these fees, over 40 PHV operators have gone out of business?
No, I wasn't, Chair.
Are you aware, Mr. Mayor, that, for example, Greyhound cars, who are currently paid an enormous increase from about £2,000 for their operator licence, now they pay £30,000 for their 5-year operator's licence. If they get one more car in their fleet, if they expand their business, if they seize the opportunities that London presents them, it will cost them £150,000. How is that equitable, Mr. Mayor?
Well, Chair, I'm not sure if I can comment on individual businesses in this great city, but there are
right.
lots of great businesses
let's not do that
city.
then. If you own between 51 and 100 cars, it will cost you £30,000 for your 5-year operator licence. If you own 101 cars or you operate 101 cars, it's 150,000. How is that an incentive to expand, Mr. Mayor? What advice do you give to those private hire companies when they're trying to expand their business and provide employment and put the food on the tables of their children?
But Chair, that question could be asked about any ban system. That's like asking, how is it fair for somebody who purchases a property above a certain price to pay higher stamp duty even though it's £1 higher? That's like saying, how is it fair to make somebody who earns £1 higher pay an increased tax bill when it comes to income tax?
Mr. Mayor, yes, it is like saying that.
It's basically a ridiculous question, Chair, but
It
because you've allowed
like
it must be in
that,
order.
Mr. Mayor, and what I'm looking for is an answer. That's absolutely like asking that. Now, why is that fair?
Well, Chair, I've just explained, but I'm happy to explain again. Any system that has bans is obviously going to have some people on one side of the ban, even if it's by £1 or one car, paying a higher than would be if they're below a certain ban. The same applies to stamp duty on house purchases. Yeah. The same applies to wages in relation to income tax.
Hypothetical
and the same applies in relation
to you don't control.
Chair, I'm being interrupted by not one but three Tories. I mean, at some stage you've got to step in, Chair.
Mr. Mayor, this is not a hypothetical commentary on something you don't control. This is a commentary on something you do control, which matters to a lot of people. It matters to Londoners who are earning their living, who are trying to expand their businesses. So what advice would you give to those people who've been successful enough to have got 100 cars in their fleets? That doesn't mean they own them all, and they want to expand. How would you encourage them, Mr. Mayor?
Well, Chair, the operators' licence fees change was consulted on quite expansively and very fully. We've announced the changes in operators' licence fees. I realise there are some businesses who aren't happy. As the Mayor, my responsibility is on a variety of issues, including making sure we want to have businesses that flourish and thrive. But also there are other challenges there are in relation to our city, and that includes making sure we have equitable band systems. And in any band system, you will, I'm afraid, have those who just fall on one side of the band who feel disproportionately affected.
I'm just trying to get...
I think Assembly Member Boff is asking, what do you say to that person who is on the band? Do you say start another business, or do you say buy another car, or don't buy?
Are you a mayor?
Can I say it's quite remarkable you're now doing the job of Boff for him. But let me answer. It's quite remarkable.
I'm
looking forward to next year with an impartial chair. But here we go. Let me deal with the question.
This is me seeking.
I'll deal with your question first, Chair, then his one.
Mr. Mayor. This is me seeking to explain as I.
Oh no, it's not, Chair. I'm sorry, Chair.
The question.
It's not. This is you being partial. Let's be frank here.
Mr. Mayor,
this is you being partial.
I think the Chair is right.
Let me answer the Tory Chair's question. Let me ask this question.
Mr. Mayor, this really is right. It's about I want to know.
He was trying to help you.
Somebody's establishing.
Look, take his offer of help, Andrew. Take his offer of help. Let me answer his question.
Mr. Mayor, somebody's got a small business. How do they expand it when they've got such penalties for expanding that business?
Business plan.
Well, Chair, shall I answer your question or his?
They're really the same question.
Well, I know they're the same, Chair, because you're helping him. So let me deal with the Arbor-Boff question. And the answer to the Arbor-Boff question is, when any business expands, they consider a variety of issues in relation to their business. So, for example, if you're expanding a business and need another premise, you'll pay an additional rent for that premise. You need to pay additional rates for that premise, but you balance that against the additional profits you may make from expanding your business. And I'm surprised for a party that used to be a pro-business party doesn't understand basic economics. And let me say this, Chair, I'm surprised by you being more partial than normal in today's session.
Mr. Mayor, I'm merely trying to understand the plight of small businesses in this city.
Chair, I've answered the question for the fourth time. I can answer it again if you like me to.
Perhaps, Mr. Mayor, would your advice to people who want to start up in business is buy a big one and then vote for Sadiq Khan, and then you'll get your small business?
Chair, let me address that head on. Any Conservative member who claims to speak on behalf of big business when they're responsible for this Brexit strategy can't be taken seriously. We have big businesses queuing up to criticise this government, yet Assemblymember Arbor-Boff are defending pro-business credentials. It beggars belief.
Of course,
let's
Mr. Mayor,
call a halt. Let's call a halt.
Should that be the case? Of course.
No, Andrew. Let's call a halt to this discussion.
Oh, Chair,
can I move on to
this partnership is as good as Starsky and Hutch. Carry on, please.
I've always admired the quick draw of Starsky and Hutch. Assemblymember Hall.
Mr. Chairman, I'm so confused now. Right, I'll address this to you, Mr. Mayor, the most business-friendly mayor ever. I should not think those taxi drivers think so. When the Economy Committee was considering the draft strategy, one expert said that because there weren't any overriding performance indicators, timelines, significant milestones, performance indicators and budgets, it was more like a shopping list. So that were the actual words of one of the guests. Do you agree with him?
No.
You don't? I do.
Chair, shall I say it again? No.
Yeah. Well, that's what an expert said.
Mayor's answered.
Yes.
Chair, the question was, do I agree?
No.
And you said no.
And I said no.
That's the answer then.
Right, thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions?
Hang on, she hasn't finished.
Yeah, I have. I asked.
Did you have another question?
Sorry,
Assembly Member Boff has another question.
The answer's no.
I think it possibly is. What is the cost of the implementation of your strategy?
Of the EDS?
Yeah.
Yes, he says that
How much
is
is
his
it going to
question.
cost? How much is this implementation strategy going to cost?
You'll see from the implementation plan that there are a number of actions in there, and the strategy overall has a wide range of actions. Not all of the actions there are completely within the Mayor's control. A lot of it is using the convening power of the Mayor to work with businesses and others to get the actions there. What we have got is in the action plan, the implementation plan, there are a number of actions that we are funding as a GLA ourselves.
But what's the cost? I get that.
I haven't got the exact cost of all those things in front of me.
So we don't know how much.
I can get that to you with all the things that the GLA
Well, it would have been good to get those costs prior to the Assembly being called upon to approve it.
Chair,
would it not have been a good idea to get to this Assembly the costs of this implementation plan before we were asked to exercise our statutory duty to approve
Chair,
it?
this is a classic example of party politics getting in the way of sense, because the
it's
chair of the... No, Chair, let me ask a question. Chair, I've not finished my answer. The chair of the Economy Committee who addressed this Assembly never mentioned this. Never mentioned this. Members of the Economy Committee up until now haven't mentioned this because Assemblyman Boff has been embarrassed by his last question. He raises a ridiculous point about the cost.
You're
now, if it is the case, Chair,
it's a very simple question.
Chair, if it is the case that the Assemblyman's phone hasn't got a calculator, I can happily lend him a calculator.
Mr. Mayor, the fact that you draw attention to my previous question means that it must have been some discomfort to you. Thank you very much. Means I've done my job.
That's why Tony jumped in to defend you.
There's one other question, and perhaps I should declare an interest as Chairman of Africa House London. And that is, you talk about the business opportunities in North America, Germany, France, China and Indian markets within the implementation plan. A quarter of the world's young population in a few decades will be African, and there's no mention in here. Why is that?
Well, if you allow me to answer that, the Africa is still it's an interesting market, but still a small market. China and India are the two of the world's fastest growing economies.
Absolutely, Mr. Agarwal, and I can remember when India and China were small markets, and the wise money.
When was that, Chair?
The wise money was when it was pitched at the right time. We're just on the bandwagon, the China bandwagon. Surely, Mr. Agarwal, surely we should be recognising the opportunities in the future.
Well, given the resources that we have, it's best to focus where we think we can get the most bang for our buck. And I'm sure Assembly Member Hall would agree with that. Always conscious about where we can get more for our money.
But Chair, if the suggestion is we increase the budget for London and Partners, I'm very happy to hear that amendment if that wants to be passed by the Economy Committee Chair.
My policy on
happy
economic
to have amendments from Assembly Boff or Hall.
Mr. Mayor, my policy on economic development is the same as it's always been under your predecessor. I always think the economic development strategy should be one single page with the words "this page intentionally left blank" on it, because I think intervention in the economy is not what we need.
Chair, is that
a free
question?
market.
Time's up. Must be.
Tell me off.
Surely, Chair.
That was a statement. Tell me off.
Par excellence.
Your witty response, I'm afraid, will have to be left for another time. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor and colleagues, for attending. We now move for a debate on the motion on the agenda set out in my name that the Assembly notes the draft economic strategy. In a moment, I will ask members whether there are any amendments to that motion or any other motions to be moved. Can I remind members that in accordance with Standing Order 3.19F and the provisions of Section 42B of the GLA Act 1999 as amended, at least two-thirds of Assembly members present and voting must carry the motion. Abstentions do not count as a vote against and so are excluded from the calculation of the two-thirds majority. Any other motion requires a simple majority of members to be carried but is not binding on the Mayor. So firstly, are there any amendments? Oh, good. Excellent. Well, if there are no amendments to the motion or any standalone motions which relate to the economic strategy, can we now debate the standing motion, which is to note the strategy? Anybody got any views on that?
Noted.
Good, good stuff. Well, so the motion before us is that you note the draft economic development strategy.
Votes in favour, Chairman.
Those in favour of noting the draft economic development strategy?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
13.
9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12, Chairman.
Right.
Over there.
Did you quote?
Sorry, 13, 14, 15, Chairman.
Yeah.
And those against? Against noting? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
None.
Chairman. 8, Chairman. 8 against.
Right. Well, it says here I should sum up, but the motion clearly has been carried, so that's my summation. We now move on to the date of the next meeting, which is scheduled to be the plenary meeting of the Assembly to be held on Thursday the 6th of December here at 10 a.m. This meeting will principally be used to hold a question and answer session with the Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience and the Commissioner of the London Fire Brigade regarding fire and resilience matters in London. No urgent business has been tabled. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
GLA Chamber